Yeah, welcome everyone. Um, so I just want to do a quick check-in, see how it's going from last week. We talked about a few things. Um, Maybe it would be good to rehash those things or to share any sorts of observations that you might have had on trying to practice the exercises. Just take yourself out for a walk. Do you remember that one? Trying to slow down. That was the point of the slow down exercise, right? You were in an even meeting, walking around the room, and then you cut your speed in half and do it in half again and do it in half again. Hmm. Yeah, you
Yep.
know that?
Yep.
Mm.
I've been doing that too, to try and break that sort of moving center grip
Mhm.
that you can feel it has on your life.
Yeah.
That's one thing I've been doing. I must say it's very refreshing. The
Cool.
other thing I've been trying to do is memorize the pattern of the sleep and morning routine
Mm.
to try and in a structured and sensible way put your centers to sleep so they're separated from each other. And then in the morning to wake them up gradually. So I've been trying to learn that routine.
Mhm.
The one thing I've noticed is I'm still dreaming, but the nature of them has changed,
Mm.
and I won't
And
go into that because I can't really find the words for it.
yeah,
It's really strange. Um,
well, dreaming is when one center is chit-chatting with another.
yes,
And it is part of the reaffirmation of your life, right? Because everything kind of goes to sleep, begins its wind down process, but then the thinking center might go, "Am I all alone?" Right? It wakes up a little bit. "Am I all alone?" The emotional center says, "No, you're not all alone. Here's what I'm doing."
yes,
Right? And the two get into a play together, have a bit of a communication together, and the result is the dreams. Right?
right,
And the other centers can do this as well. The instinctive center, for example, or that part of the moving center, can wake up and uh, interact with the moving center itself, right? The other half of it, its cohort, and give you a falling dream, for example,
yes, yes,
where you're like,
yes.
all of a sudden your body starts because you feel like you're falling out of out of some off a cliff or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I've got one little question
Hmm.
relating to the paper. I don't necessarily need to ask it now, but I can if you like. If you want
Sure.
to, I can. The paper mentions the shining ones,
Hmm.
and I've heard that reference once before on a recording. I have no idea what it means, but whether we deal with that now or later or some other time, I really don't mind. But
Absolutely later. Yeah.
yes, yeah,
Absolutely
fine,
later.
fine. Yeah, I've got no reference for that at all. But
Yeah. Yeah.
okay,
Okay. Uh,
okay,
just in short, this is the Shining Ones is sort of how everything shifted for me a few years ago.
right.
Of a few years ago to be precise. But yeah, we'll get into that in another meeting, I think. Yeah, good. Um, let's talk a little bit about the progress of this way because it occurs to me that based on the way that our culture goes about things, it might be easy to assume that the more you learn, the more development you can achieve or attain. And I question that because if that were the case, then every philosophy major in school would probably be a highly developed individual. And I would argue that they're not. In one thing that I want to emphasize about this work is that there's a separation between the kind of knowledge that the personality itself can get to, right? And the kind of knowledge that we'll talk about the higher centers, but what the higher centers can get to. And they're very different. The personality can only go so far. It can go wider. You can learn more and more and more and more, right? Going out this way. But it can't reach beyond a certain point of elevation. No amount of knowledge will ever get you there. From the personality standpoint, something else has to come in. Um, so, the reason I bring this up is because last time I drew a diagram of the positive personality connected via esoteric knowledge to the negative part of one's essence. Yeah. And this idea of the connection being the esoteric learning itself that puts you into contact with that and then eventually causes a reversal so that the personality becomes receptive to the positive aspect of one's essence. And to a degree, that is very true, but the esoteric connection itself is not exactly knowledge based. It's not like, if you read every archive that was written over the last 50 years, that you will automatically know enough to be developed. Yeah? There's something else that comes into play. I'm going to talk about what that something else is a little bit later today. Over the past few weeks, we've spent quite a bit of time discussing the lower centers and really the three primary ones, right? Because I've argued that the sexual center is mostly non-existent in people. It's an instinctive act. And the instinctive is really just another part of the moving center. So we talk about the moving center, the thinking center, and the emotional center. I got the order of those mixed up traditionally, but it's okay. But there's also two higher centers. And while the lower centers themselves are misshapen, not very well intact, the higher centers, namely the higher emotional center and the higher thinking center, are completely intact. And the reason why is because nothing in your personality or your education or your history can really touch those. That's the divinity aspect of yourself. The higher emotional center really is constantly wise, constantly trying to communicate, but we just don't hear it because we don't have the apparatus to hear it. Yeah, it's like you have ears, but if you walk around life with noise canceling headphones on, you're not going to hear what's going on in life. Yeah, and that's sort of kind of what's going on with the lower centers. And so, in order to establish that connection with the higher centers, the higher emotional center and the higher thinking center, we first have to correct the functioning of the lower centers. And that's what a lot of this work has been geared towards. Some examples of working with the moving center I've given in the past, which has to do with assuming different postures than what you're normally comfortable with. Being able to watch your speeds with things, yeah, getting out of the moving center as much as possible and working to become more conscious and less mechanical. Yeah, that's the major work of the moving center. Along with certain types of physical exercises, which we can get into at some point. We're not quite ready for those yet, but there are certain physical exercises that you can do that can help to strengthen the vigor of the moving center itself, give you more energy, yeah, give you more vitality in that way. The work on the emotional center, we haven't talked much about it. It has to do with a certain type of transformation. We have discussed what the emotional center does. I'm talking about the lower end, not the higher emotional center. That its primary function is to discern the truth of something or to connect to things and get on the frequency of things, right? There's another thing that you can do with the emotional center, and this has to do with the transformation of energy. There is a practice included in this work, which is to not express negative emotions. And I want to be very, very clear on this. Okay. It does not say don't have negative emotions. It also does not say don't suppress emotions. It's don't express. And you do this for the specific reason of transformation, transforming something, because emotion is a very energetic thing. Yeah, it takes energy to connect to something. When you connect to something, you receive the energy from it. It's imbued with energy. And one of the functions of human life is transformation. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you begin to feel angry, you have an opportunity there. And that opportunity is by intentionally not expressing that anger, but letting it work itself in. It begins a process of transformation. Okay. It can, I should say, it can begin a process of transformation and ultimately become higher forms of energy inside the body. As that friction has nowhere to go, you can transform it into really your own immortality in the long run, if you want to put it that way. But it's very important to stress that it should be extremely intentional. This is not, like I said, suppression of negative emotions. Do you know the difference? Right? When someone suppresses something, it's generally out of fear, you know, because they're not in the context of doing so. I'll give you an example. You're driving your car and you're speeding or something like that, and a police officer pulls you over. And his attitude towards you is very condescending, right? I'm just making up an imaginary situation. So much so that you take it personal. You get very offended. You know, like, why are you talking to me this, like he's treating you like an asshole, right? That sort of thing. Most people in a situation like that are not going to get out and shove the police officer, right? Or yell back or do anything like that. They're capable of controlling that type of reaction. Whereas if it was just a normal person on the street treating them that way, they might very well get into a physical confrontation. Hmm? We're able to control that because of the threat of, being put in cuffs and hauled off to jail. Yeah, we see the consequences. That's suppression of negative emotions out of fear. That's not the conscious refusal to express. Do you understand the difference? Hmm?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so going into a work like that on the emotional center, and I would say we're probably not there yet. We're probably not ready for that yet, but keep it in mind. Practice it maybe once a week. Yeah. See if you can get your spouse to make you angry and you intentionally choose not to react. Yeah. You'll feel amazing afterwards, by the way, if you try this exercise as an exercise. It's gives you so much vitality. Um, the trick to it, though, is to never express it. Not never express it ever again in your life. I'm saying that, an event happens that triggers you and causes some sort of negative emotion in you. You get angry, right? And you think you've won because you've gone for 3 hours and you haven't said a peep about it, and you feel like you've been transforming it in yourself. But then a month and a half goes by and you get triggered again, and all of a sudden that same one comes out. That same negative emotion comes out, and you attach it on like a passenger that doesn't belong. Look at this look. You attach it on like a passenger, to
Not me.
the one that you're expressing. You see, that's not a win in this work. It means that if you've decided not to express that emotion, that you do not ever express that emotion. That keeps the power of its transformation intact. You see, this is very difficult.
This is 14 minutes. Yeah, so when this happens, I'll play this video.
Yeah, okay.
14 minutes in.
Time code around 14 minutes in. Yeah.
And so, okay, right. So that's work on the emotional center. We have work on the moving center. We have work on the emotional center. Work on the thinking center. To get it into balance is to get out of judgment. That's the primary task of the thinking center, and get into assessment. The difference being like this, you may not personally like raisins, for example, but you have assessed that you have a bit of an iron deficiency and it would be useful for your complex. And so you decide you're going to eat raisins simply because it assesses properly. You turn into kind of Spock in that way. It's not about person, Spock, you know, Spock or Data, right, from Star Trek, you turn into one of those characters in the thinking center, in the mind. And you begin to take things as an assessment of value, as opposed to a judgment of value, right? You may currently not like a person, but maybe it's better to assess that, you know, that person still has a particular divinity about them, and you just don't find their behaviors useful. You see, it's just a shift, just a slight shift. Once you have a bit of practice with this, something extraordinary starts to happen. You begin to form a connection to the higher centers. And by the way, the higher thinking center never connects directly to you. It always does so through the higher emotional center, then into you. Okay. So what you'll really start to experience at first is a connection to the higher emotional center. And if you want an example of it, go read the book of Revelations in the Bible, right? Because that is loaded with higher emotional centered language. Language isn't really in the domain of the higher emotional center. It's imagery and pictures. That's how it connects or communicates. You can then translate those into language. But if you read, for example, the book of Revelation in the Bible, with the lower centers, you won't understand a word of it. You won't understand any of it whatsoever. If you have the connection established to your higher emotional center as you read it, then you'll understand what I think it was what John on the island of Patmos was actually connected to at the time. You'll get it. Okay. So that's, and then really you can't translate into words whatsoever anything that comes from the higher thinking center. It's too high. It can stimulate certain things in the higher emotional center, imagery and pictures and whatnot, but you can't translate anything that comes from the higher thinking center directly into language, which means that you can't teach it. You can only lead a horse to water, as they say, but you can't make it drink, right? You can only lead a person into an ecology where they begin to establish that connection that flows into their life, kind of like this, right? You've got the emotional center here, higher thinking center here. It trickles down or rains down intelligence into it, converts it into imagery, goes over to your lower centers, and then can become words and actions and emotions and things like that. All right. I'm going to pause because I'm sure it's a different way of looking at the higher centers than you might have done so in the past. So do you have questions on it? Is it to be clarification?
Just one reflection. What you're saying about the thinking center, Piers, that might be helpful is that to judge is a slightly lazy action or response, because it's immediate without any perception, reference, or anything. Whereas to assess or compare actually takes a little bit of work, because you're having to use reasoning skills there.
What you causing me in that regard is that judgment always happens in the past and assessment always happens in the future, or at least in the present. Right? If you take something, if you judge something, it's based on previous data that you've collected on it. You know? You don't like raisins because you've never liked raisins, for example.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
You don't like a person because you've never liked that person, you know, sort of thing. It's never future bound whatsoever. So shifting your mentality towards either the present or the future can open you up to being in a more assessment-based frame of mind.
Yeah.
Well done. Mm-hmm. Anything else to toss in on that one?
I'm very, very caught by this idea of imagery, that the higher emotion center responds to imagery.
Yeah, that's its language. It doesn't have words. it has, well, this is why symbols are so powerful, for example, right? Take esoteric symbols, if you want to call them that, or even certain objectively based paintings or works of art. Those are supposed to speak to the higher emotional center. It's also why astral travel is so strange at times, because you can look at imagine this as something that you're looking at when you're in your astral form and traveling, which is a function of the higher emotional center. You see all of it from every angle at once. You don't see it like you do in three-dimensional space. You see the inside, the outside, the bottom, the top, and all around it, all simultaneously. And so it can look very strange. You pop out of that astral journey, and you go looking for what this object was in the physical world, and you realize that you saw it in a very different way, dimensionally wise. Like a box, you see the inside, the outside, and everything around it all at once. Doesn't translate that well, but that's the higher emotional center giving you imagery all simultaneously.
So are you saying in the astral world it would look different?
Yeah. Almost everything does. It takes quite a bit of practice to get used to the way things really look that way.
The reason I'm asking is because I'm in some communication with some people who are claiming to astral travel, and I'm only discussing with them out of interest, really, to try and measure, is it genuine?
The Monroe Institute or something?
Say again?
The Monroe Institute or something like that?
No, it's just a Reddit thread, that's all.
Okay.
Called Astral Projection. And people make claims. And I have a sort of background, slight suspicion about it all. So I'm just trying to get references or facts or things that I can, for example, if you were genuine astral traveling, I'm led to believe that the colours would be magnificent. And so that's one reference I have about astral travel. Just to try and measure what these people are actually doing. Are they actually astral traveling, or is it something else? That's the reason for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about the colors. If you're at least stationed in the right level of the astral light. If you're not, they're very dingy and dull. But also, how do I explain it? Try to imagine a color you've never seen before that's not based on the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, because you'll see some colors that are literally not part of that spectrum whatsoever. There's an example of it.
Yes.
When you encounter a person or an entity, again, you see inside and out. You see the emotional state or frame that they're in. You see what they're connected to. You see, this is why you can encounter someone who has things like, dragons around them, or hopefully not, but things like giant mosquitoes and flies around them. You'll see things like that sometimes because of what they're connected to. Now, that's part of them as an entity because of what they're processing and connected to. And that's how you see it, right? You see the inside, the outside, the upside down, inverted, everything all at once. It all comes in simultaneously. That's the most unique aspect of that state of consciousness. It doesn't come in linearly like we're used to.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Right. So let's talk a bit about A, B, and C influences. It's a specific terminology in this work. A influences are basically everything in the culture, everything that you encounter in life, okay? And they're all going in different directions, but they all counterbalance each other. All right, I'll draw it out, it'll be useful. Did it follow me or is it up on the ceiling? Okay, here we go. Is it trying? It's trying. They can't.
It's not yet.
Hello, here I am. Hello. Okay. Got to go slower.
It's better.
Right. So here's life. And within it, you've got all of these A influences going every different direction. Okay, but the sum is basically zero. When I'm saying A influences, I mean like, you know, a bus ride and all of the things that you encounter. Sometimes most aspects of your education would fall into this A influence bucket. Your, you know, I mean, do you understand? It's just everything that in life that you encounter. Now, sometimes, and you'll notice that I drew each of these A influences has a counterpart. So this one's counterparted with this is counterparted with that. It's roughly a sum zero type of thing. It's what I talked about the other day regarding the law of accident. Now, sometimes a person can find themselves in a cluster of those A influences that makes them feel like they're making progress. Right? I'm sorry, let's see. Night. Yeah, sure. General habitual living can be part of it, definitely. Right. But yeah, it's like the cruft of life that you constantly encounter. And some people will find themselves near a cluster of A influences, like here, for example, where they become very wealthy, for example. At the same time, another individual will find themselves over here and they became very poor. And so it's this kind of constant offset. This is what's meant in the work by it's not reality, because everything in the general scheme of things has its opposites, right? The richer someone becomes, the poorer someone else becomes, if there's a fixed amount of money, for example. Isn't that right? Those are A influences. B influences all go the same direction. And I didn't make my circle big enough, but you'll understand that every B influence you encounter is all going to point in the same way. All right. Now, B influences would be things like, well, there we go. Come on. Religion, things of a spiritual nature, right? Esoteric interests. You understand? All of that type of stuff. They all point in the same direction, meaning that they don't have opposites. And if you collect enough of this in your life, then it works like a magnet. Okay, it begins to magnetize you, and and you grow within you something called a magnetic center. A magnetic center is something that is pointing the same direction as all of these B influences. Now, I'm not saying join a particular religion. I'm saying collect these essences from all religions, all spiritual practices. Put yourself on the frequency of things that are that don't come necessarily from, you know, just the polar opposites of everything that you might encounter in your life. Once you have a magnetic center in you, something that's been magnetized by these various influences, it begins to attract more and more and more to itself. Okay? All right, so you understand the idea behind the A influences and B influences, generally speaking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, B influences, if you attract enough B influences in your life and you develop what's called the magnetic center in this work, then it puts you in a position to come into contact with what's called a C influence. And a C influence doesn't come from within this zone here. I'm sorry about this camera. I'm going to probably have it stop following me. It doesn't come from inside of life. Sorry, that's supposed to be a C. It comes from here, comes from outside. And it's kind of like what energizes and charges these various B influences. You remember in the Enneagram how it goes 1, 4, 2? In other words, it goes high, highest, lower, and then middle. It's the same sort of thing that happens within this, right? You've got this kind of bouncing effect where a B influence has the radiation and the frequency of a C influence, but C influence comes from something much higher. It's not it. It's like connecting to the essence of Christianity versus just going to church. That makes sense? Very, very different. And there's D and E influences, which we don't really need to go into at this point in time. I just want to get in the territory of it so that you begin to start to think about it. There is one danger, however, and that is this, that every once in a while, an A influence, because they kind of point in random directions, will look like a B influence. Did you notice on the diagram that there's some of the A influences were going in the exact same direction as the B influences? Those are accidental. Doesn't mean that they're a B influence. It just means that they are accidentally going in the direction of that. And this is where cults, C-U-L-T-S, cults come from, right? Because they collect all of the A influences, tend to collect all of the A influences in the culture that all point in one particular direction and bundle them together so that it seems or feels or appears to be a B influence, right? And it is possible to be magnetized in a very strange direction. Now, we're talking about, do understand that the imagery on the board is an aspect of the higher emotional center trying to communicate a concept in terms, all right? It's not exactly accurate on all levels, but it's just used to illustrate something. Yeah, and so if a person attracts those A influences that are all pointing together, then they develop what's called a false magnetic center. And it's very easy to do that and end up following a path that ultimately doesn't lead you anywhere. Doesn't lead you back to an esoteric core. Generally, the problem is we're not in a position to recognize those until we've hit a certain level of development. Generally speaking, you're not. You know, that's the big danger of this, because you can very easily be strung along and led by somebody who has collected a bunch of A influences all point in the same direction. But because there is no connection to a C influence behind it, you just, you know, magnetize yourself in some random direction. Makes sense?
Yeah.
That's the biggest danger of any kind of journey is make sure what you're dealing with actually has a source, has something behind it.
So that is where the word or the phrase or idea invention comes in.
Yeah.
In the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's especially predominant in this type of work. And you'll have to watch yesterday's video, but I can literally blame Gurdjieff for that.
Right.
Obfuscated or hid the origins of his teachings. Yeah, and so you get these groups today that call themselves fourth way groups, for example, and you know they're doing things like yoga, introducing yoga into it, and Tai Chi, and you know, ritualistic magic practices, and thelema, and you know, theosophy, and like everything else. And the reason why is because they don't have a foundational core where all of these things are coming from. And so they're just kind of like saying, this is part of it, and this is part of it, and this is part of it, and this is part of it, right? Trying to bundle it up together.
Yeah, understand.
Mm-hmm.
Cultural astrology being another example.
Yeah, sure, right. Yeah.
Okay. So to get into real magnetic work, would that be work into the laws, work into what I call neutral territory?
I think that's actually a very good place to start, right? Because at the very least, the laws of creation do come from an esoteric core. They come from the core of creation. Yeah. And so by working into the laws and going on a journey of discovery, you can very easily avoid invention from that standpoint, because it either works or it doesn't. You know? You see, like this little laboratory that I have set up over there, well, the plant's in front of it, but you can kind of see it. Right? The little laboratory I have set up over there is specifically because I wanted to either prove or disprove certain actual things to myself, right, in my discovery of the natural laws. And if I do my chemical experiment the right way, I get a certain result. If I do it the wrong way or incorrectly, I get another result. That's a very objective way to go about research. Now, I'm not saying, go out and buy a bunch of glassware and start boiling things. Find your own way of proving and disproving these things. It just happened to suit me. Yeah, just happened to suit me. You don't have to do that what I do, but go out into nature and go to the source. Yeah. Very, very important aspect of this work is to make sure that you keep that magnetic center clear and clean, because it is very easy to gather, collect, or draw to oneself the A influences that are in the culture that appear to be B influences, but aren't really. And yeah, then you get this kind of conglomeration. This is why I go back to this idea for everyone of work it, actually work it. Take what you think you know and do something with it. Mark, what was my expression? Remember the best advice I could ever give you?
Do what you know.
Do what you know, right? Don't speak what you know. Don't think about what you know. Don't teach what you know. Do what you know. Yeah? Because that'll show you if you actually know it. Everything you think you know, if you can't do something with it, it's only a theory. And this goes for everything you've ever learned in the Eminent too, for some of you. All the thousands of little tidbits. If you can't do something with it, it's not knowledge. And you should really separate it out of your magnetic center until such time as you can prove it for yourself or disprove it. It's a safer, saner way to go about this work.
So yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense. Whereas a lot of people turn to the work of others to find their magnetic center, but actually, if you can go to the core, if you can go to a neutral source, if you can have your own way, your own investigations going, that's got to be safer. I can definitely see that.
Yeah, and you'll actually get the vibrancy of it as well. I have many experiences where this has kind of been proven true in my own life, of where I'll be working into something, and sometimes it's months, sometimes it's years, sometimes it's days. You don't know when that aha moment is going to come. But I can't take that aha moment when something finally comes together. Yeah, and you get that just joy. You get that inspiration, that wow, okay, yeah, that moment. You can't take that and transmit that to someone else. I can't say, hey, Knight, here's what I've discovered, and you might go, wow, that's really interesting, but you're not going to feel what I felt when I discovered it for myself. Even if someone else has discovered it before, right? That's the use of the archives, or the various things that I've written, is take them, go maybe, and then work it and see if you can get there on your own in a different way. The law of 3 and the law of 7 and the law of 1, that's all you really ever need to know to stay on track in this work. Because there's only 3 laws in the universe. Now, you don't know that, do you? Try and prove to me that there aren't. Come back to me and say, no, Pierce, there actually is a law of 2. A law of 6 or 43, or I see some struggles going on in you, because most of you think that there is a law of 2, or at least some of you do think there is an actual law of 2.
Yeah, you see how most of the laws that we think of the law of 2 are actually nothing more than graded scales, which require a reference point to substantiate. For example, hot and cold. You can't substantiate that unless you have a reference point.
Yeah.
So you've automatically brought a third point into that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hot in relation to what, or cold in relation to what?
Yeah.
This is where the four elements come from, right? I'll give you an example with the law of four, for example. Okay, because people say, oh, there's a law of four, and it's a solar thing. It really comes, like you said, from two bars. Hang on, do I have? It comes from two bars. You've got one bar going this way, which is hot. It's a terrible age. Hot here and cold here. And like you said, this is a continuum, a spectrum. Okay, and crossing that, you have another one with wet and dry. Dry cannot be compared to anything unless there's a spectrum between wet and dry. Okay, now, when you get these intersections, something that is hot and dry was called by the ancients fire. Something that is dry and cold is earth. Okay, something that is wet and cold is water. And something that is wet and hot is air. Right? This is where the four elements come from. From our planetary perspective, we sit right in the middle of this intersection of hot, cold, wet, dry. And so therefore we experience things as the law of four, but they don't have their origin in the law of four. It's just two examples of the law of three intersecting. It gives us various phenomena. You see, and the pentagram would be the same thing. There's no law of five. It just takes into consideration the spinning aspect of the law of four. The law of six is nothing more than the law of three and superimposed upon another one. You see, so that you get that upward and downward pointing triangle. You can break them all back down into 7 and 3 and 1. Every law. There's no law 44.7. It's like that joke where a bunch of monks are sitting around, right? And a new monk joins them. You know this? A new monk joins them, and someone shouts out, 32! And everyone just roars or like laughs a little bit, right? And then another one yells out, 27! Everyone laughs a little bit. And this goes on for quite some time. Chuckles, kind of like, that sort of thing. Goes on for quite some time. And then all of a sudden, someone yells out, 94! And the room just goes bananas. Everyone starts to laugh, rolling on the floor, tears streaming out of their eyes. And the young monk is like, what in the world is going on here? And he says, oh, well, we've been together for such a long time that instead of telling jokes, we just have a list of jokes, and we refer to them by number, you see. And so when someone said 17, then that was this particular joke, and so on and so forth. And he goes, okay, I guess that makes sense, but what about 94? He's like, oh, well, we hadn't heard that one before. Yeah, so it's more funny, right? Okay. Yeah, there's no law of 94. Now, don't believe me. Go back and work it, please. Absolutely, please, because you'll get a chalkboard in your house, hopefully someday, or whatever your way is. You don't have to get a chalkboard, it doesn't matter. But a notebook, an etch-a-sketch, if you will, whatever. But begin to work it and try. You can go about it as trying to prove it or disprove it. It doesn't really matter. It's just the act of working at it, actually working at it, that's going to bring you that kind of invigoration and that joy. It feels incredible, and that's yours to keep. It really is. And then it's not me saying, here's this, here's that. I mean, I'll give you terminology. I'll give you ideas and concepts. But when you do the work of it, then it's yours to keep. You're earning your own immortality by doing that. This is an unusual lesson that I'm giving. It's a little less structured than normal. I hope you're okay with that. I'm just actually trying to talk to you from my heart, pal. Yeah. get you excited about this.
So when we think of the pentagrammic human, Piers,
Mhm.
are we not quite seeing it as it is? We think of 5 centers. We think of well, obviously we've got 5 digits, 5 extremities.
Yeah. So when you're talking about 5 centers, again, I go back to this idea of there at best being 4, right? Because the instinctive center is a part of the moving center
Okay.
within. But our pentagrammic structure is sort of like the diagram I drew on the board of these various forces coming together, right? Of two triangles, one kind of offset and the other one going up this way, and merging at one point. It's really something simpler, but yes, we have a pentagrammic form because it does appear here as the number 5 and 7 and 44 and whatnot. We have those appearances here, but the root or the origins of it is not pentagrammic. I would actually say it this way. God, whatever that is to you, doesn't know what a pentagram is. Peculiar to say it, but you understand. Do you understand what I mean by that? It's because it doesn't need to. It knows how to get there. We understand what a pentagram is, but God doesn't need to know. It knows 1, 3, and 7, and that's good enough because everything else can be gotten to from there.
Okay.
I think on the site I have a paper that I did on the quality of numbers, not quantitative, but qualitative aspects of numbers, and I talked about some of the unique mathematical properties of them. Do you remember seeing such a thing? Maybe it's not up there. If it isn't, I'll try and find it later. Okay, and send it out in a message. But you'll see certain things about 3 and 7 that make the rest of it make sense.
Okay. And when you say this, are we mainly talking about as they turn up here for us on Earth?
Yeah.
Or is it a universal?
This is the biggest confusion about the whole concept of the laws in the ray of creation, right? Because it's always been said, you're in a planetary condition of 48 laws. I'm pretty sure science can name a heck of a lot more laws than 48. I mean, you get down to the quantum levels, and you're talking about all kinds of. There's got to be hundreds of them. I've not done the research, but it can't be talking about that. Let's see. You got the law of conservation of energy. You've got the gravitational constants. You've got all of these types of things. That's not what this is saying. What it's saying is that we fall under 48 orders of laws. In other words, we have 3 here, the 3 fundamental ones, which is the law of unity, the law of 7, and the law of 3. That's the ones that really give us our knowledge of planetary expression. Then above that, we have those 3 from all planets, how they manifest, kind of trickle down. Okay. But above that, you've got 3 that trickle down. And so when you take it up to the top of the ray of creation, you've got unity, 3, 6, 12, 24, 48. It's because you're adding all of the laws that occur above it. But when you get right up to C, right up to the chamber of God itself, you've got those 3 fundamental laws. Each level down is just an expression plus 3 of those. Do you understand that? Does that make sense?
Yes, I remember reading one of your papers about this.
All right.
So 3 comes down the various rays of creation.
Yeah. Listen, okay, here's another way to look at it. Every time you look a little bit further up up or down on scale, you lose a dimension. Okay, you have 3 dimensions. You've got a volume, right? You know that it's like 3 dimensions. You've got volume, you've got a ball or a box or something like that. Beyond that, you've got a plane, and beyond that, you've got a line and a point. Okay, now or I'll just say a point actually, because that's how it shows up. When you look up at something like the moon, for example, you don't see its sphericity. I'm not sure what that word is. You don't see that it's spherical, do you? You see the surface of it. You see a plane. And if you look even farther up to the stars, you don't even see a plane. You see a point. Okay. The same thing happens if you look lower, start getting out your microscope. And once you leave your own realm or your own zone, you begin to lose dimensions. Everything for the moon thinks of itself as three-dimensional and looks at us and sees that we look like a plane. Same thing, right? And looks elsewhere in the universe and sees a point. It loses dimensions. But for it, it's three-dimensional. That's the idea of this law of three manifesting differently in each plane or in each level. You see, here on Earth, we sense these three dimensions. They are what we know. But this trickle-down effect gives us a different perspective. You know? If you take time into consideration, then you can say that the sun is more like a rod anyway, and we're like a series of helixes around this rod, instead of looking at us like that, like some ball, because it's traveling like 40,000 miles in one particular direction. So if you look at time as a dimension, in other words, you can walk to the past, present, future, eternity, these sorts of things, then you would see the sun as a bar, not as a ball. And that's a different way of perceiving things. Does that help kind of clear up the idea of this trickle down of the laws? Things look differently at every level of the ray of creation. Part of the idea of the gaining higher degrees of conscious awareness is that you begin to see things from their own perspective, not from your perspective.
Yes.
If you have a sun level connection, you can see the sun the way it sees itself instead of the way you as a planetary mammal see it. This is the idea behind becoming a sun and becoming a star. The Milky Way galaxy sees itself as an entire body. Right? It is the Milky Way galaxy, and it's got brothers and sisters, billions of them actually, that inhabit that are other galaxies. They're entities. The planet sees herself as an entity. We're just like a little sensitive film on her. Just a matter of perspective. Yeah. Right. So let's make this practical. I think it would be a good idea to begin to look at things that you carry around with you, content-wise, and determine whether they are A, influences, B, influences, or artificial B influences, if you understand what I mean by artificial B influences. I would be so bold as to say an artificial B influence is potentially, or it should be categorized as potentially such if you can't do anything with it. If you can't do anything with it, it could be. I'm not saying it is, but it could be an artificial B influence. And that should give you years of homework. Because for the most part, we end up trusting someone and just going, yeah, they're probably right. Oh, they're probably right. Yeah. And then you take it in as your own knowledge, and in some cases it's not true. I mean, I have been told that there is like hydrogen 32, for example, by a particular person that should know better. Yeah. There isn't. Because I can prove it from the laws, you see. I know that there isn't because it can't work in this universe. Not in this universe. There's no such thing. It'd be incomplete. It's just not possible, right? But there are people who believe that because they were told that, and then they start talking about things like hydrogen 32 to other people, and so on and so forth. And you know, pretty soon you got this like wacky thing going on, you know, that isn't based in anything in reality. You have to be able to prove or disprove this stuff to yourself. Otherwise, you're in grave danger. Grave danger.
Yeah, and
Messed up the radiation diagram. Did you know that? If you have a copy of The Journey, go look at his illustration of the ray of creation. Shocks are all over the place. They're in the wrong spot. The idea is roughly the same, but it doesn't conform to natural law. It's okay. He never claimed that he was going to be right about everything, nor do I. Yeah, got to take it in and work it. Yeah, what were you going to say, Knight?
no, just other than you know, there are some topics and subjects that are intriguing, but they don't lead anywhere.
Yeah, sure.
And I can give you a classic example that I've spent a lot of, I'd say, yeah, quite a bit of time on in my life, because I'm still fascinated by it to this day. But I know for a fact it doesn't lead anywhere. So I just sort of keep it on the back burner, hoping that one day that it will.
Yeah.
And that's the topic of UFOs. You know,
right.
I've always been intrigued by it. I've always thought there's something that I should know about this.
Yeah.
But I know for a fact that if I invest too much time in it, it may be a mistake. Because it doesn't actually lead anywhere, or I don't think that it does anyway. But you know,
no, Toyer was one of those. But yeah, well, and talking about shining ones, actually, we'll bring this full circle. The curious thing about UFOs and aliens and all of this sort of thing is we come at it from such a human perspective. You know, we always think that they're here to invade us, and we have to, you know, be on the defensive. And from everything that I've ever seen in the universe, that's probably completely absurd. Right? We're the only species that goes around really attacking each other and trying to take over territories and, you know, bombing each other and violently invading and all those sorts of things. It's like we're projecting our own weird human distorted mentality on the rest of creation, as though aliens that are developed enough and sophisticated enough to get here are you know, just as messed up in the head as we are as humans. I think it's very unlikely that we'll ever encounter an alien invasion. If anything, they might observe us as a cosmic anomaly, and go, huh, that is one strange planet. But very doubtful that they're ever going to come and, you know, conquer us. Why would they? Anyway.
exactly.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, good. A little early, but let's go ahead and wrap it up. I'm not sure where else to take this. I just wanted to bring into the mix a few different territories, specifically regarding the concept of magnetic center, A, B, and C influences, and the higher centers. It's good to be aware of them. Yeah, especially if you do get into a point when you begin to talk or communicate with them. I don't know if it's on the site, but you know that story, right? That I wrote that had the riddle at the ending of it. That was very much written from a higher emotional center standpoint. So much imagery in there. Okay. Right.
Just to say, Pierce, is this why children love stories so much?
Oh, absolutely. This is where fairy tales come from. Fairy tales have their origin in the higher emotional center.
Yes. Interesting.
And even the grim ones do something very valuable.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll put it this way with regards to the higher thinking center. It's more akin to a state. You can't convey it verbally or pictorially or anything like that, because it's a state. When you're in communication with the higher thinking center, you are in a state. It's the only way you can say it. A certain type of state. It's different depending on what it's dealing with, but it's not really something that you can convey to another person. Yeah, it's like, how do you describe nirvana? Satori, or, you know, enlightenment. it just is what it is. It's not, you know, it's not like anything on this planet. It's not like anything you'll ever come into contact with at this level of the ray of creation. It's just not. Yeah, right. That would tie into the gemrod aspects of diamond, star sapphire, and star ruby, where those have their origins. Yeah. All right. Anything else from anyone?
You were going to ask something.
Can't remember what it was. Was that paper? What's the paper where you had something at the end? Put something at the end.
Oh, I'll have to dig it up. It was I thought it was on the site, but maybe not.
What's it called?
I don't know. I don't even ever go back and read anything that I wrote
Okay.
because it's out of me at that point. I just remember the process of it. It was very visual for me. It starts off in a forest, and the man encounters a cave, and it's very much like.
Does it rings a bell?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll take it up. It doesn't matter. I'm just trying to give examples, not necessarily say go read this.
Yeah. Okay.
I actually have an aversion to reading anything that I've written in the past or watching these videos. I know I record them and put them up, but I don't really go back and watch them because I just have an aversion. It's not because I don't like to see myself on camera or or whatever. You know how people are like, "Oh, I can't believe I sound like that." You know, I don't care about that. But I think I have an aversion to it because for me, it's old food. When in process, it's generative. Go back and rehash it. It just feels stale in some respects.
Right.
Anyway, right. Okay. Well, thanks everyone.
I have a question.
Yes.
Regarding A and B influences. Are there other forces that might be guiding us to certain influences, or like B influences, or help us, things like coincidences or signs that we might encounter?
Yeah.
Like,
Excellent question. I've often struggled with this, whether a person is born with somewhat of a magnetic center that's going to attract the influences into their life. I have memories of when I was like a toddler, 2 years old, right? And having certain perceptions about the laws, literally like perceptions. I'll give you an example. I think I was 4-ish and I had this little toy. A mechanical toy is like a plastic thing, and you take this piece of this little booklet and you put it in, and it had a little dial on the side, and it would flip through the pages of this booklet almost like you're watching a television program, you see, but it's all just paper, right? But it's flickering by. And then you take that out and you put another one in and you watch another story type of thing. And although I didn't have the words to articulate it, I had the emotional feeling of what reincarnation is. It's like that, right? As a child, I could sense that reincarnation is like that, where you have a role and you play it out and you take it out and you put another one in, you play it out, and so on and so forth. I had that feeling, that sense of it. No words, obviously. A 4-year-old doesn't know what reincarnation means, but yeah. But it speaks to there having been some kind of magnetic center in me, probably at or close to birth. You know? And I think some people are like that, and some people will just naturally they're at that stage in their progression where they will begin to attract those types of influences to themselves. I do think that's probably the way it works, but it's still a bit of a riddle or a mystery for me. Because you can take someone else, right, who's raised in a very religious family where they're constantly swimming in B influences and they have absolutely no desire for it whatsoever when they get older. Some people are like that. Yeah. So there is an entity aspect to it, I suppose.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, did that answer or at least help get in the
Okay,
territory?
yeah, I did. Thank you.
Yeah, I remember sitting in a bathtub as a baby, and you know how like when you start to push the water and it goes and it hits the edge and bounces back to you, and if you get in just the right rhythm with it, you can get it to splash out of the bathtub just by adding the same amount of force each time, right? This kind of like you get this wave going and it just gets bigger and bigger until it's all over the room, that sort of thing. I remember doing that, and you know, along with the giggles and fun of how much it was to get the water all over the room, it also caused in me this understanding of the idea of the ebb and flow and the balance and the, you know, well, the law of two, which is really the law of three. You know? But it had that resonance of it. And I think these kinds of experiences are fairly common for people who find themselves drawn to this work. And a very unique work. Yeah. Yeah, great. All right, well, thank you, everyone. There won't be a Saturday meeting next weekend, but there will be a Sunday meeting. And I'm available during the week for email exchanges and possibly one-on-one meetings, but my work schedule's been getting a bit hectic. So emails are easier to reach me, okay?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pierce.
Yep.
Thank you,
you bet.
buddy.
You all.
Mm.
Bye-bye.
Have a good week. Bye.